My name's Thomas Richardson. I'm a clinical psychologist, and this is my point of view about the psychology of bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder is something you might have heard of. It's a mental health problem characterised by episodes of depression when people feel very sad, maybe losing interest and pleasure in usual things, hard to sleep, quite maybe self-critical, guilty, hard to think straight and concentrate. And then there's also episodes of what's called mania or hypermania, where people might be quite elevated or irritable mood, lots of energy, quite impulsive, and maybe more sociable, maybe more kind of sexually inhibited. And bipolar disorder can cause a lot of problems, sadly. It really can be disruptive. So I think the important thing to say is that, first of all, there is a continuum, there is a relationship with normality. So these are mental health problems and they cause lots of problems, and some of the processes are the same as in people who don't have a mental health problem. So if you think of describing yourself when you're really happy, if you get really good news, you might say stuff like, I want to talk to people more, I spend more money, I want to go out more. So it's that times 10. Again, if you're sad, if you get some bad news, if you've had a difficult day, you might not want to talk to people, you might have some self-critical thoughts, again, times that by 10. So it's on a sort of continuum with what most people go through, but it reaches a stage where it really causes a lot of problems. Now, there's lots of research going on about genetics and the brain and bipolar disorder. What I'm interested in as a psychologist, and what I think personally is under-researched, there's not a lot of research in the area, there's not enough, is about the psychological side, the mechanisms of where these highs and lows come from. A lot of people, for example, the patients that I'm working with might say, it feels like these episodes come out of nowhere, I'm okay, and then bang, I'm kind of really manic and causing a lot of problems. And I think often there are some more subtle things going on that lead to the build-up. So I'm going to try to just go through some of the factors that are related to these mood changes in bipolar disorder. The first is research has shown there's a big impact of life events on people with bipolar disorder. Now, life events impact us all, so this might be stuff like getting a promotion, getting married, moving house, bereavements, divorces. They of course impact everyone, and you're likely to be really happy or really sad when these things happen. But with bipolar disorder, they have an even bigger impact. Okay, so we think of this idea of stress vulnerability. So people with bipolar disorder, they have like a bowl that's already nearly full, and you keep pouring water into it, which is the stress, and it's easier for them to spill over. So yes, a divorce is difficult for everyone, but with someone who's vulnerable to bipolar disorder, it's going to have an even bigger impact. But like I said, it's not just the negative life impacts that can lead to, for example, to depression. What we also know is that positive life events, good things, can also be a trigger for mental health problems. For example, people who get promoted, that might have an impact. And I myself have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and I've also had the experience where, for example, getting good news about research and things going well actually makes my mind race and makes me get more and more ideas, and it kind of increases into the point where I kind of nearly become unwell. So it's not just the bad. The other thing is, research has shown people with bipolar disorder tend to have quite high standards. They can be quite critical of themselves, set quite a high bar for themselves. So they might say things like, have high goals around goal focus. I've really got to achieve, so I should be able to do anything I put my mind to. I need to achieve, I need to do more. And research has shown that these kind of thoughts are linked with more hospitalisations. And all this need to achieve as well, so kind of defining yourself by your targets and what I achieve. And research has shown people with bipolar disorder tend to catastrophise about things going wrong. Okay, so if something goes wrong, it's going to be catastrophic. So very high standards and quite perfectionist. And I think you can see how this might relate to mood, because if you put the bar for what I've got to achieve there, if I don't get to there, well, then I feel down and I criticise myself, I'm a failure and I'm useless and I'm worthless. And if I do get to that bar, guess what? I'm just going to increase it, and I want to achieve more and work harder. So it can become this kind of goal-focused, unsustainable drive, which can become kind of mania. Sometimes there might be a case where the messages people have got from families might be part of that high standards, or from society. So research has shown, for example, that families who are very heavily emphasise achievement, needing to achieve and goals, people in those families might have more of these kind of high standards thoughts that might be related to bipolar disorder. But cultures as well. So there are societies which are quite individualist, like here in the US, Western countries, and ones which are more collectivist cultures, places like India. And the individualist societies, this is a international study, that individualist societies which are more focused on the individual achieving performance, those were linked with a higher prevalence of bipolar disorder. So those countries had more people with bipolar disorder. There's also this idea of a positive bias, so seeing the world with rose-tinted glasses. Now, we all tend to be a little bit in our own echo chamber, our own bubble, something us psychologists call confirmation bias. So we tend to sort of, that's why we read a paper that fits in with our political views, is because we want to confirm what we're already thinking. People with bipolar disorder, when they're down, they tend to overgeneralise from their failures. So if I failed here, I failed in everything. And you can see how that might make you down. But also, people who are prone to mania tend to overgeneralise from their successes. So when something good goes in one area, they think, oh, I'm amazing with everything, and this is going to go well. And they might become overly optimistic in a lot of ideas, and you can see how that will increase your mood as well. Related to this as well, research has shown big ideas are a factor in bipolar disorder, so having sometimes overly positive predictions about the future, more ambitious, and more ambitions for kind of fame, fortune, political influence. And there was even one study that found that people who wanted to be more famous with bipolar disorder, that predicted whether they were going to relapse over the next few months. And again, this makes sense. If you really have strong ambitions for fame and fortune, you're more likely to stay up late and take on more goals and say, yes, 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 I'm going to work, spend money to make money, and it can bring your mood up and up. Creativity. There's a stereotype, which is sometimes unhelpful, about bipolar disorder as like a tortured artist, and there's lots online about famous actors and artists who have the diagnosis. So it's possibly a bit of an unhelpful stereotype, and some of the research shows it's possibly true. So people with bipolar disorder tend to have quite high scores on kind of art appreciation, creativity, feeling inspired. There was even one study that people with a degree in art were more likely to be hospitalised than the general population. So again, if you feel really creative, inspired, that might drive big ideas which can become manic. Being independent as well. So research shows people with bipolar disorder tend to be quite maybe feistily kind of independent, really wanting to do their own thing. Again, when people are manic, they might not listen to what other people are saying. Research shows kind of the more your mood goes up, the more you don't listen to what other people are saying. And so I think this makes sense. If you've got a business idea, you want to go at it alone and you don't listen to other people saying this is a bad idea, then it just drives until it keeps escalating and causing problems. Related to this independence is actually there's research about leadership and being entrepreneurial. So bipolar disorder is linked to traits around kind of leadership, and there's even a psychologist in the US, John Gartner, who has written a book saying all of these American figures who are very successful, how they had some element of hypomania, maybe not bipolar disorder. And again, that makes sense. People who have big ambitions in terms of, I want to lead people, I want to create a business, that makes sense that maybe then coping might escalate and just build up and up and up until it starts to cause them problems. So there are a few different psychological models explaining mood changes in bipolar disorder. One, for example, is that people with this diagnosis are more sensitive to a sort of dopamine hit from the brain when you get a reward. So rewards, whether they're achieving something or something sexual, it kind of has a bigger impact, and so you're more likely to kind of chase it, try and get these rewards again. One of the models I personally, as a clinician and as someone who myself has the diagnosis, find very helpful is a model by Professor Warren Mansell from the University of Manchester, which I think brings together a lot of these factors I've been talking about the psychological aspects of bipolar disorder. So what his model really says is that these triggers, so it might be like the life events I talked about, they lead to kind of early warning signs. You might notice you've got racing thoughts and more energy. Now, what the model says, and there's research to back this up, is what's important in escalating these early warning signs into an actual episode is the sense you make of them, so how you think about them. And it might be that you have different thoughts about it at the same time. So I can completely get this. I know that when I've been manic in the past, one part of your mind goes, well, this is really scary, I need to go and talk to the doctor and take medication. And there is another little part of you that goes, oh, this is fun, I could use this, I could go out, I could be like life and soul of the party, I could get loads of work done, I could be really productive. So people often have these kind of positive appraisals maybe of the fact that they're starting to become unwell. So they might think, I'm going to be able to be really productive, or I'm going to be really sociable. If you imagine, for example, that someone's been depressed for months, really hard to get out, really hard to talk to people, and then they start to notice they've got more energy, they've got more drive, they've got more sexual interest, it's understanding that they're kind of tempted to go with that. And they're tempted to go, well, I'll just kind of go with this and use it. And what we know again from Warren Mansell's research is actually that a lot of people, when you ask them, do you want to completely switch off bipolar disorder, more people than you expect would say, well, I don't want to have complete control over it because maybe I'm more fun and maybe I can do things a little bit better. So you get these early warning signs, and then some people might think about it and think, oh, actually, maybe I can go with this for a little bit. And then you do things which bring your behaviour up. So you go out more or take drugs, spend more impulsive, and it brings your mood up and up and up until you do become unwell. And I think this really links to all the other things I've been saying, for example, about high standards. So if you're someone who's got really high standards, you want to achieve a bit of a perfectionist, and then you start to notice the urge to really, stay late, not sleep, plough into work, because then you can achieve more and meet your targets at work, then it makes sense that you're going to do more, and it might increase into the point where you become unwell. I think what's interesting for me as well is that it's kind of the same underlying psychology, the same underlying patterns of beliefs fuel both the highs and the lows. So the high standards, if you don't meet the standards, you go down. If you don't meet the standards, you go up. So a lot of people that I've worked with say, I don't want to get rid of the highs, the mania, I only want to get rid of the lows, and unfortunately it's not that easy. You can't pick and choose, and the problem is that people feel tempted to go with the mania because it feels nice maybe, and it might do at the start until it goes too far. But you can't just go with it and switch it off. So the example I use with people is it's a bit like you're on a skateboard at the top of a really steep hill and you're going down it, and at first it's really fun, but the longer you stay on it, the faster you go, the more you speed up until you can't get off, until you crash and hurt yourself. And it is a bit like that with the mania. So one of the difficult situations I often come across is talking about this idea of, do you want to get rid of the mania? And some people kind of say, well, I want the pros of it and not the bad side. So that is one of the bits of the work that we have to do together. So I guess if I could give one word of advice to people with the diagnosis, it would be, I think, be kind to yourself, be fair to yourself in terms of high standards. Don't set the bar too high for yourself, and just think sort of carefully about the pros and cons of the highs and whether they're worth the risk, and just bear in mind, like I said, it's tempting to go with them, but if you do that, it's just harder to put the brakes on.